Welcome to A Conversation with History. I'm Harry Chrysler of the Institute of International Studies. Our guest today is Robert M. Berdahl, who is the 8th Chancellor of the University of California at Berkeley. A historian of modern Germany, Dr. Berdahl is the author of The Politics of the Prussian Nobility, the Development of a Conservative Ideology, 1770 to 1848. Before coming to Berkeley, Chancellor Berdahl served as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Oregon from 1981 to 86, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, 1986 to 1993, and President of the University of Texas at Austin, 1993 to 1997. Thanks for being with us,
My
Chancellor
pleasure.
Berdahl.
My pleasure.
Did you grow up in a small town or a large city?
I suppose it would be a medium-sized city. Sioux Falls is the largest town in South Dakota, and it had 50 to 60,000 people in it when I grew up in it. It has about 120,000 people today, so it's sort of a small city.
Looking back now, how did that setting shape you?
Oh, that's hard to say. I was sort of the first generation. My father had grown up on a farm in South Dakota in a very little farming community that was overwhelmingly Norwegian and a very closed society. He was the only member of his family to sort of break out of that, to go to college, to marry outside of that community, and so in some sense I was still tied to those roots, but in a transition out of them, and I suppose that small city provided that kind of transition phase.
Were there any educators in your family?
Well, my mother was a school teacher originally, and my father had gone to the university, had then actually come to Berkeley to graduate school in 1922 for a year studying economics, and then his hometown, since he was the only kid who'd gone away to college, and they were developing a new consolidated school district, he was invited back to be superintendent of schools in this little town. He went back for what was a substantial increase in income over his TA salary of about $375 a year here at Berkeley, and then discovered he didn't really like doing that, so he only did it for a couple of years, and then went into business, later worked for the federal government, and ended up working for an insurance company the last years of his life. What,
looking back, was the most important influence your parents had on you, you think, in shaping your values?
Well, I think my father put a very high premium on truth-telling. I can remember a lot of instances, one in particular when I had skidded with the car and bent a wheel and didn't want to admit it, and he knew I'd done it, and I got a bit of a lesson in the importance of telling the truth, that it was a lot easier ultimately to tell the truth than not to. And there was a very heavy emphasis on being straightforward, and I think that Midwestern values, at least in those days, were pretty wholesome, and people, it was a neighborhood where people looked after each other and cared for each other, and I think all of those values were sort of rooted in that community and sense of community that existed there.
And that's a theme that we'll talk about in a few minutes, that you actually pick up in your role as Chancellor. What about any teachers in the period when you were still young that you recall, or mentors, other people who shaped your thinking and your style?
Well, I did a lot of interscholastic debate when I was in high school, and I think, and some in college, and I think that a lot of the peer group that was involved in that were good students. They were people who, and kids who worked hard. We worked very hard in debate. We were the state champions a couple of years when I was in high school. And that was a very good activity that I think, first of all, taught me how to use libraries. And I think that the teachers and the coaches that we had in those debate programs were very influential in sort of shaping values on argumentation, on building a case for or against a particular issue, on thinking through what the implications of a particular issue might be. And so I think I would say that that was the single most valuable learning experience that I had in school.
Once you did your undergraduate work where?
At Augustana College, which was the small college in Sioux Falls, a Lutheran college. I couldn't really afford to go away from home to school, and so I lived at home and went to school.
And you wound up majoring in?
History.
In history. And you just fell into it?
I don't know. We probably fall into the things that we're good at, and I enjoyed it. I was reasonably good at it. I thought that I would, originally I thought I would go to seminary, then I thought I'd go to law school, and then my senior year, my advisor, probably the most influential person in my undergraduate, one of two influential professors in my undergraduate years, a fellow named Dick Solberg, asked me if I had thought about graduate school and offered to recommend me for a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship, which they were giving out wholesale in those days. And I was happy enough to get one, fortunate enough to get one, and went off then to graduate school, thinking I'd get a master's and then go to law school, and I just got hooked.
You got hooked. Yeah. In this undergraduate and high school period, any books that stand out that really affected you, actually, or that
in graduate school
well,
or undergraduate?
Just as an undergraduate. Still as an undergraduate, you're still uncertain about it.
Well, I'm too old to be able to remember very much about specific books, but I studied mostly American history. Right. I was fascinated by the Civil War, read probably all of those Bruce Catton books, learned a lot about narrative history from that sort of thing, and but I don't remember any particular book that.
And I gather at one time you were thinking of studying U.S. foreign policy, but then yes. Moved into German history. Tell us.
I went to graduate school interested in American foreign policy. Actually, wrote a master's thesis at Illinois on sort of American public reactions to the immediate post-war events that led to the Cold War, and enjoyed doing that, but I also kind of got bored with American history. This was 1959-60. It was really before the kind of transformation of American history took place in the 1960s, and I think I wasn't probably bright enough to anticipate some of the changes that were going to take place in the interpretation of American history in the 60s. I took a seminar in German history my second year in graduate school, got fascinated by it, and and was very taken with the young professor who was teaching that, and gravitated toward German history. Then he moved to the University of Minnesota after that second year in graduate school and took me with him. So I then moved to Minnesota to continue work with Otto Flanze, who was my doctoral advisor.
Mm-hmm. And ultimately your dissertation was on the politics of the Prussian nobility.
Well, no, it really wasn't. My dissertation was, it was related to this. My dissertation was on the Prussian Conservative Party during the period of German unification from 1866 to 1876, roughly. And I had originally planned on pushing that into a more extensive book. There were a lot of other people working in that area, and as I started trying to understand the roots of some of that conservatism, it pushed me backward, and I ended up back in the 18th century. And this book is has very little relationship to the dissertation, but it had its roots in some of the questions that the dissertation forced me to ask as I thought about what preceded that particular period.
And what is there a theme that you could identify here? As I looked at it, it's a very it's for an esoteric subject. Well, no, not esoteric. Not necessarily of current interest. It's a fascinating tale, actually, of how the social group really adapted to the change in their world.
Well, that's been a theme that's fascinated me. Basically, how social classes relate to one another, and how in this particular case, the Prussian nobility, which was one of the most durable nobilities in Europe, because it really lasted until in some sense, till the end of the Second World War. But it became early on in its history a very powerful class, though not an inordinately rich class. And it made the transition to a capitalist market-oriented society where it was predominantly an agricultural class, in a very successful manner. And so the durability of that aristocracy was sort of what fascinated me. And I think in the larger sense, what drew me into German history, and which I think is sort of the underlying question in that book, and an underlying question in a lot of studies of German history, is how is it that Germany entered the 20th century without ever having developed a modern, democratic, responsible, liberal constitutional framework. How is it that monarchy and the military and the aristocracy continued to dominate German politics in an intensely industrial capitalist era, and what are the implications of that for the politics in Germany in the 20th century? Those were some of the issues.
And what was your contribution to that riddle? Did you have some little piece of it, or?
I would say probably a little piece of it. I think that trying to show how the view of authority that the Prussian nobility shaped in its management of the landed estates that it controlled was transformed into an era in which public politics became predominant in the 19th century. How that view of authority got transformed into a conservative ideology, how it adapted that framework of authority to a post-capitalist era is a kind of important consideration, and at least I thought it was, and that's what I tried to study in that book. But
at a certain point, you chose in your career to move away from history and into university administration. I'm curious, to what extent do the skills of the historian stay with you as you have assumed this role of leadership in research universities?
Well, I think that we're all influenced by our disciplines. I have known a lot of people in academic administration from different disciplines, watched them operate, and I think we all come to problems with a mindset that is shaped to some extent by the kind of disciplinary orientation that we've had. I'll never forget when I was an associate dean and we were pushing through a curriculum change in the college, and the dean, who was a chemist, thought it was patently obvious what the right thing to do was, and I said, but you know, the politics of it aren't going to permit that, and I viewed some of these issues from a standpoint of of power politics, and he viewed them very much from the standpoint of how you mix and match and put together the best kind of curriculum. And so I think that there is a way in which what one studies shapes how one views administration. I sort of accidentally got into administration. I did not intend to. I was asked to come into the college on a 3-year stint in Oregon to lead a curriculum development, and I did that, and then went back to my department. Was subsequently asked to come back as dean, and decided that I'd enjoyed that, and so I sort of drifted into administration. I don't know if it was a conscious decision or not, but at some point I had drifted so far that it was hard to go back. And
what skills are required, do you think, to run a public university?
Well, I'm sure there are a lot of skills, and most of us in these kinds of positions have only a few of them. I think probably the most important factor that shapes or determines success. I shouldn't say the most important factor. The most important factor that shapes success is probably luck. But I think the thing that is really critical in these positions is a kind of sense of values that we hold, that are core values. That is, those things that we will cling to even when it costs us to cling to them. I think that's implicit in leadership of any institution. And if there's anything wrong with sort of the way in which American institutions have been driven, it is the sort of market mentality that you do what the polls tell you. And I think that for leadership is ultimately a moral endeavor. And so I think knowing what the values are that you hold dear about a university is a kind of plumb line that is really the most important characteristic. Beyond that, I think the ability to live with ambiguity is important, because there's no issue that can easily be resolved in clear black and white terms. The world is quite gray. Knowing what one really holds to be true and important in that gray world is I think, fundamental. But being able to live with the ambiguity is also important. I think the thing that most of us aren't trained in, because we're all amateurs. Every university president came out of the faculty with their primary experience being in research and teaching. Still, management and some management skills are, I think, important, because these are big, complex institutions that require a degree of management as well. I mean, they're big operations with a business side and the need to control costs and all of those things that affect management.
Let's talk about this moral dimension and then go on to some of the problems you confront. But maybe one way to get at this is to ask you, what makes a university distinctive as a community?
Well, I think what makes a university distinctive as a community, and each university has its own flavor of that distinction, but it really ultimately is the pursuit of knowledge that binds us together. The fact that everyone in a university is committed to the learning process, either as researchers and faculty or as students, and that value of the free and ordered space in which inquiry can follow any direction. I think that's sort of the fundamental core, the notion of free inquiry, but disciplined inquiry is the core value of this of a community that we call a university.
In your inaugural address last year, toward the conclusion, you quoted Hannah Arendt, and then had this sentence, and I'd like you to comment, because it seems to be an overarching theme in what you were saying: to inherit and renew the common world. Tell us a little about that, what you meant by that, because the notion of to inherit is, one could say, comes from your being a historian, and you're conscious of that.
In some sense.
Yeah.
I think I have had in my administrative life, as well as in my life as an historian, a fascination with the nature of community. If you look at the book on the Prussian nobility, one of the themes of that is sort of the transition from paternalist social relations to social relations that are determined by wage labor. The conservatives, and conservatives I think always have a strong belief in community, but conservatives believed that the introduction of monetary relations in the wage labor system destroyed all of these paternalistic bonds, and I think that there's an element of truth in that, in what was happening. Those paternalistic bonds were not quite as nurturing as conservatives tended to believe. They were pretty oppressive in many ways. Nevertheless, it seems to me that sort of the nature of community is an important theme for my thinking. When Hannah Arendt talks about the common world, it seems to me inheriting and building this common world is what education is about. I don't think there's any collective activity that we engage in as human beings that is more basic, more fundamental, more necessary for the collective interest to prevail than the education of the next generation to take their place in the world. And that's what I mean by, or that's what she means, I think, by inheriting the common world, and to discover something new in that process. And so that common world, it seems to me, is what binds us together as human beings, and the kind of values that we share.
You also, in the course of your inaugural days, quoted Arthur Miller and spoke about the university using what he had said about a play. You said, I would like Berkeley to be a place where our students can learn to create whatever it is it takes so that they can sense a warmth in the world that was not there before. I would like Berkeley to be a place that will help them to dream of doing more and risking more. Mm-hmm. The warmth part of that is easier, I guess, at a place like Swarthmore.
Sure.
And so on. What are there particular challenges that occur at a place like Berkeley in making that a reality? Just as a factor of the size.
I think the challenges are enormous at a place like Berkeley, and to some extent they are greater at a place like Berkeley because of many of the assumptions that we have about the learning process. I think that we have such outstandingly talented students that we sort of believe that all that is necessary in their development is that sort of intellectual challenge that is there, and that is obviously the cornerstone of what a university is about. Mm-hmm. But the development of whole and complete human beings involves something a little bit more than just that intellectual stimulation. It involves some kind of moral challenges, I think, and some kind of sense of responsibility to the larger community and not simply to oneself. And that, it seems to me, is one of the things that is harder in large universities, because if you look at how the university, like Berkeley, has changed through the years, there's much more of a transactional mode in a contemporary large university. You pay your fees, you take your courses, you get your grades. That's the transaction, and ultimately the transaction results in the accumulation of enough credits to get a diploma. That, I think, 50, 80 years ago was not. It was much less of a transactional relationship, and I think that what we need to do is to minimize some of the characteristics of that institution, and hone some of our more collective instincts and communitarian senses.
You spoke of the arts of uncertainty, the sciences of the spirit, the Geisteswissenschaften, to use the German word. How do you bring some of that back? How do you impact undergraduate education that would be a reality more and not just an ideal? Have you thought about that at all?
Well, obviously, the Geisteswissenschaften refer to the humanities, as we call them, and I think that we need to make certain that students not just are exposed to those, but that somehow the questions that they raise about what it is to be human, what it is to suffer, what it is to die, what it is to love, those are the questions that are in some sense implicit in the human sciences, as it were. And students leaving the university with simply a set of technical skills are not going to be educated as whole human beings. And so we've got, it seems to me, to make certain through our curriculum, but through the way in which questions are posed, even in the non-humanistic disciplines, that those issues are addressed. I had a class this week where we talked, it's a history of the university, and we spent really the entire time, because of contemporary issues on the campus, dealing with what is moral responsibility, and is it the place of a university to try to educate students with morality, with sort of acquiring a sense of moral obligation to others. And how do you do that? Do you do that with classes? Do you do that with sort of implicit assumptions? Do you do it with an honor code? Can you have an honor code in a university this large? Those are kinds of questions that, it seems to me, ought to factor into that educational process.
So in a way, it's a combination of all these things. I mean, both in the curriculum, in books, in activities on the campus, but also in outreach.
Most of our moral education comes from our parents, and it probably is shaped in the first few years of our lives. But most all of us are also deeply affected by those faculty members that pose those issues. I've just been reading this book, Tuesdays with Maury, which is our conversations between a former student and his former professor at Brandeis on the professor's last months of life. And it's clear that what this student took away, not just from those classes that he took, but what he took away from these Tuesday conversations with a dying man was much more than sort of the technical skills of the discipline.
A lot of the issues the university confronts these days are really related to some of these questions that we've talked about. One which you talked about during the seminar, back to that the day of your inauguration, was the impact of globalization, really, on public universities, and the extent there are a lot of positive sides to that, but on the other hand, it really is leading to a breakdown of some of the communities that were the basis of support for the university. What do we do about that? The extent to which many of the communities that supply students to the universities are being hurt by the consequences of globalization, where the jobs are, for example.
Well, I don't know that I have an answer to that. I think this is, we're in a remarkable transition, I think, in terms of the whole set of institutions that we have taken for granted that developed in the course of the 19th and 20th centuries. Clearly, the nation state as an entity that came into being in the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries and probably reached its apex in the 20th century is, I think, becoming less and less relevant. It still is very relevant, but much less so than it was. And capital has no longer any national boundaries. We're going through a kind of cyclical shift, and it's very clear that what happens in Russia or what happens in Asia affects the stock market in the United States, affects the prevalence of jobs and interest rates, and the whole globalization of the economy that makes nation states less vital has an impact as well upon universities. And our students have to learn to operate in that global world. How we deal with this transition is still, to me, an open question, but it's a very important and interesting historical moment to be living through. I don't know how long it will last, and I don't know what will come out on the other side of this transition, but I really do think we're witnessing a major change in the authoritative structures of society that is probably as large a change as we've seen since the 18th century.
One additional dimension of this, which seems to affect universities, is that during the period of the Cold War, the state in many ways related to the university through national security, basically, and we've lost that value in a sense, or since we're no longer worried about the Soviet Union, and now it's markets that affect things for the university. Talk a little about that. That is, it's really a new environment that you're dealing with as the head of a university, and you've said that you want to protect these core values, but on the other hand, you do have to acquire the resources to make the university work and succeed and plan for its future.
Yeah. Well, I think that the framework of privatization, which has been over the last 20 years in the United States a very powerful thread, has also obviously affected universities. We are, and to some extent, it has affected Berkeley in very interesting ways. Berkeley has, it seems to me, the most complete and careful system of evaluation on the basis of merit of any university with which I'm familiar. We place a very high premium on academic excellence. We review faculty regularly for any kind of merit adjustment. And the ethos of merit, which is implicit in all universities, is more refined and articulated in Berkeley than any place that I've been. Then you have sort of cutting into that the implications of the market. and the fact that professors can command salaries not just at other universities but at biotech companies or the emerging, or they can develop companies themselves, as many of our faculty here have, in this burgeoning knowledge economy, knowledge-based economy. So that there's a higher premium upon the kind of talents that our faculty have in the marketplace than there ever has before. And the intrusion of that market drive or the market pressure, just as I say, the market began to dissolve a lot of the kind of tendons of community in the early 19th century. It certainly is in the university today. And so how we redefine or define or maintain the core values of the university in this increasingly market-oriented framework is a big challenge, and it's a bigger challenge for Berkeley than it is to a lot of places that have simply really let the market define merit. We have insisted that the market was not synonymous with merit here at Berkeley. And I think that's a great value for us to cling to. But we somehow have to reconcile that as well with market forces, and it's going to be a very challenging issue for us in the years ahead.
And to the extent that your job involves setting priorities, I mean, push comes to shove
That's
on your
right.
desk.
You can't ignore the market, but it isn't the be-all and end-all, and it does not, in and of itself, define merit.
The other situational issue that you confront is that these forces out there, globalization, privatization, and so on, create great pockets of inequality, basically. And part of the university's mission traditionally has been to educate the future generations and address that inequality. How can we maintain a steady course in continuing to move in that direction, but while still abiding by whatever the political decisions are of a particular time? And I guess I'm not asking you for a policy statement. Really, I want a sense of how you navigate this. If you understand what I mean. In other words, how do you weigh all of these and continue moving toward that goal of helping achieve equality in the greater society?
Right. Well, I think that universities have been historically the great engines of social mobility in a democratic society when you had large public institutions like this. The closest thing I think the United States has ever had to a real social revolution was the GI Bill, which opened up educational opportunities to millions of GIs that would never have gone to universities without it. And when I talk to alumni from the 50s or late 40s from Berkeley, the sense that their experience at this university transformed their lives and transformed their opportunities is a very, very real thing for them. And that, it seems to me, is one of the values that this university also has to try to maintain. It is more difficult because the quality of schooling that people in their elementary and secondary schooling have available to them is much more differentiated, I think, than it used to be. I mean, there was in public schools a half century ago much more equality of quality. And now, for a variety of reasons, that differentiation has grown. We have some excellent public schools. We have some abysmal public schools. We have an increasing number of students of means moving from public schools into private school settings that avail them a better chance in a meritocracy of being able to gain access to the resources of great universities. And that's a big problem for us, and I think that we have to be involved in trying to re-establish an equilibrium in the public schools, or we will become an increasingly elite institution that is serving only the students who come from backgrounds of real means and opportunity. And I think at this point, Berkeley still remains a tremendously transformational opportunity for a lot of students. 25% of our student body come from families with incomes of less than $35,000 a year. And that's largely because California has a very large immigrant population, heavily from Asia, and students who have a very strong educational ethic and work ethic, even though they may not come from families of affluence, are able to gain access to Berkeley. And for them, it will be like it was for that post-war GI generation. I think it will be a tremendously wonderful opportunity. But we have to make certain that the growing populations in California in particular, and throughout the United States, have better access to quality elementary and secondary education that will provide them with the means of getting into these very selective universities.
So the two things that we as a university can do is take to the bully pulpit, or you can,
right,
on the one hand, and the other is some outreach, but
yeah,
it's the really broader societal questions here.
Very broad societal questions. I mean, it is entirely possible that the United States, and there are economists who have almost predicted this, or at least held it out as something to be wary of, that the United States, and Robert Reich has talked about this, the United States could very well evolve into a society with a differentiation of wealth that is very much like a third world country typically has been, a large mass of or undereducated, unemployable, marginally productive population, with then an elite class that has access to the means of the society through education, and really has that is a small, very affluent class. And that differentiation of wealth would be, I think, ultimately destructive of the democratic process that has made this country great.
It sounds like you're describing a social institution that has a number of challenges to confront and so on. What do you think these major research universities will look like in 25, 50 years?
Oh, that's a very hard question to answer. I think in some respects they will look very much like they do now. I think they will still be, I hope they still are centers of research. One of the phenomena that worries me in our society is the fact that if you look at, say, the biological sciences, there are now large private foundations attached to biotechnology companies that are able to establish research centers. They have enormous wealth to put into these, and they are able to attract some of the best minds and to develop a research center outside of the context of a university. And I worry that one of the great geniuses of American research has been that it has been linked closely to graduate education. If scientific research begins to gravitate into laboratories that are separate from and separated from the training of graduate students, I don't know where that fresh kind of blood will come from. So it's very vital, it seems to me, that we make certain that people understand the very close link between graduate education and research in a university like Berkeley, and that we foster that understanding. And if we are successful in that, then I think Berkeley will remain, as it is, a tremendously strong research center, graduate and undergraduate education center. In addition, there will be clearly some from universities like Berkeley, and because our faculty is so distinguished, there will be networks of delivery systems, of courses, of material, of lectures through all of the electronic communication facilities that are at our disposal and becoming more and more sophisticated each day. There will be a delivery of the education and transmission of the ideas from universities worldwide. And so the university, I think there will be some universities that will be hubs for this, with a cadre of researchers and students located in a place, because that's still important. And then extensions of that, like spokes of a wheel, going out to various centers around the world. So I think there will be a much more interrelationship between this university and learning centers elsewhere. And at the same time, there will be a location. I don't think we're going to go to a virtual university worldwide.
I was just going to ask you that. So we'll always need and have a classroom and a seminar.
When we look at constructing a new building on this campus, the issues that always come to the fore are: how are the faculty in this building going to relate to one another? How are the graduate students going to relate to students in adjacent disciplines? And that demonstrates, it seems to me, the importance of physical proximity in the process of fertilization, cross-fertilization of ideas. I don't think we'll ever get rid of that need. The chance encounter, the chance conversation that you have at the coffee pot, the kind of offhand question that someone asks you about your work that doesn't happen on the net, because that's a much more calculated and planned conversation than anything that you do over a coffee pot.
When you're on the bully pulpit, I guess the other two things you have to talk about are the two B's, buildings and books, because that's really important for your agenda and making that happen.
It's vital, and if I had to identify Berkeley's greatest vulnerability, it is the two B's, as it were. It is the fact that we have an aging campus with a lot of deferred maintenance, a campus that is seismically challenged, as it were, located astride the Hayward Fault. A lot of buildings that are less functional than they need to be for modern research. More than any other university that any other front-ranked university, I think we've got a big challenge in this regard. I came from the University of Texas. We had an estimated $25 million deferred maintenance problem there. I assumed that would be consistent with what Berkeley faced, and I discovered it's probably in the order of 10 times that here.
Gee, okay. One final question, and that is young kids out there who are looking at the university, and we've actually talked a lot about the turbulent, the great transformation going on in the society and in the university. Is there a message to them about that from your life and career about education and about setting your sights on a university education that you might want to make at this point?
Well, I can tell you the advice that I gave to my kids, as
Good,
it
that's
were,
what,
in a
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily the advice that I got. In my education was shaped to a large extent by economic necessity, and I suppose in some sense everybody's education, many people's education is affected by that. I think I got a reasonably good education, not a great education. I think people need to expect to try to get the best education they can, the most challenging, the most demanding education that they possibly can. I think that people need to recognize that the best education is that which really teaches them how to learn. There aren't any answers that are permanent in most of what we learn in our educational process. And learning how to learn is what it's really all about. And because people are going to have multiple careers, and they're going to be doing quite different things. I think most of our students who come here and say they're going to be an engineer, or they're going to be a doctor or a lawyer, or have some particular profession, will discover, A, that they'll probably change that goal before they graduate, or even if they don't, that what they will begin their careers doing will be quite different than what they're going to be doing 20 years into that career. And that they need, therefore, to think in terms of how that education will prepare them for the long term as well as for the initial job. And that is a hard thing to teach 18-year-olds because they're always thinking about 4 years out. But I think a well-constructed education and a high-quality university will do that.
Chancellor Berdahl, thank you very much
My
for
pleasure.
taking the time being here with us, and thank you very much for joining us for this conversation with history.